Imagine a world where your daily meal isn't grown from soil or reared on a farm, but concocted in a lab, printed by a machine, or even assembled from microscopic organisms. Sounds like science fiction, right? What if I told you that this future isn't just on the horizon, but is already being subtly woven into the fabric of our food supply, without most people even realizing it? The truth about what you're really eating and what's coming next might be far more unsettling than you could ever conceive. There's a revolution happening on your plate, and it's been planned for decades, inch by terrifying inch. To truly grasp the magnitude of this shift, we need to understand the origins. The idea of synthetic food isn't new. For decades, scientists and corporations have been dreaming of a more efficient way to feed the world. It began innocently enough, with isolated proteins and fortified vitamins. Think about the advent of margarine in the 19th century, a butter substitute designed to be cheaper and more accessible, or the rise of highly processed convenience foods after World War II, promising a future of effortless living. These were the early whispers, but the real acceleration began in the late 20th century, fueled by concerns over resource depletion, climate change, and population growth. Suddenly, the narrative shifted from better living through chemistry to saving the planet through science. Billions of dollars poured into research and development, not just from food companies, but from tech giants and even investment funds with deep, often undisclosed agendas. We saw the first waves, plant-based meat substitutes that mimic the look and texture of animal products, but are engineered from soy, pea, or wheat proteins, often with a cocktail of binders, flavor enhancers, and stabilizers. Then came the precision fermentation companies, using microbes to produce dairy proteins, egg whites, or even fats, entirely without animals. These weren't just niche products for vegans anymore. They were being positioned as the future of food, aggressively marketed as superior alternatives, healthier and more sustainable. But behind the glossy packaging and eco-friendly slogans lies a more complex and frankly disturbing reality, one that rarely gets discussed in mainstream media. The foundation of our diet, the very basis of human sustenance, is undergoing a radical, irreversible transformation, and we're largely oblivious to the grand design unfolding around us. But things took a darker turn as these technologies matured. The initial promise of sustainability and ethics began to unravel, revealing a more calculated and corporate ambition. Consider the sheer volume of patents being filed in this space, not just on specific food ingredients, but on the entire production processes, from cellular agriculture techniques to novel protein extraction methods. This isn't about incremental innovation. It's about monopolizing the future of food. We're talking about companies actively seeking to control the raw materials, the manufacturing, and ultimately, the distribution channels of what will become the global diet. The early plant-based meats, while presented as healthy, were often ultra-processed concoctions, brimming with sodium, artificial flavors, and refined oils, far removed from the whole foods they aimed to replace. Nutritionists and independent researchers began raising flags, pointing out that caloric density often didn't equate to nutritional completeness, and that the long-term health implications of consuming these novel, highly engineered ingredients were largely unknown. Even more concerning was the integration of these synthetic components into existing food products. You might think you're buying a simple loaf of bread, but delve into the ingredient list, and you might find modified starches, cellulose gums, or texturized vegetable proteins. Components designed not for nutrition, but for structure, shelf life, and mouthfeel, often derived from industrial processes. Then came the funding sources. Major venture capital firms, pharmaceutical companies, and even governmental organizations, not typically associated with food production, invested heavily. Why? Because food is control. He who controls food controls the people. This isn't a conspiracy, it's an economic and geopolitical strategy playing out in plain sight. Take, for instance, the recent push for insect-based proteins, framed as an answer to global hunger. While insects are a viable protein source in many cultures, the sudden, aggressive mainstreaming of them into Western diets, often without transparent labeling, raises questions. Are we being prepared for a future where traditional agriculture is deemed too inefficient or environmentally damaging, leaving us reliant on these industrialized, novel food sources? The conversation isn't about choice anymore. It's about a subtle, systematic erosion of traditional food systems replaced by a centralized, engineered alternative. The implications extend beyond just what's on your plate. What happens to local farmers, to historical culinary traditions, to the very biodiversity of our planet, when our food supply is condensed into a few patented, lab-grown commodities? The groundwork is being laid, brick by invisible brick, for a future where access to traditional, wholesome food becomes a luxury, not a birthright. What they discovered next changed everything. Researchers began to unearth links between the pervasive consumption of these ultra-processed, synthetic food components and a rise in chronic health issues. It wasn't just about obesity or diabetes, which are well-documented consequences of diets high in processed foods. It was more subtle, more insidious. Studies often suppressed or downplayed hinted at disruptions to the human microbiome, the complex ecosystem of bacteria in our gut that plays a critical role in immunity, digestion, and even mental health. The novel proteins, the emulsifiers, the artificial sweeteners, the stabilizers, these weren't just inert ingredients, they were active agents, interacting with our biology in ways we barely understood. People reported unexplained gut issues, inflammatory responses, and even allergic reactions to ingredients that had no natural analog. And it wasn't just individual health. The promise of environmental sustainability began to falter under scrutiny. While lab-grown meat might reduce land use, the energy requirements for bioreactors and the sheer industrial scale needed to replace animal agriculture were enormous, raising new questions about energy consumption and waste byproducts. But the truly chilling revelation came when whistleblowers and investigative journalists began to expose the corporate consolidation behind this movement. It wasn't just separate companies pushing different products. It was a complex web of interconnected entities, often backed by the same few powerful investment groups. These groups had long-term visions, extending far beyond simply selling a new burger alternative. Their goal, it became terrifyingly clear, was to control the entire food supply chain, from the patented genetic sequences of the cells used in lab-grown meats, to the intellectual property surrounding microbial fermentation, to the algorithms dictating supply and demand. This wasn't just about feeding the world. It was about global economic restructuring, creating a system where a few powerful corporations held the keys to humanity's most basic need. The scariest part? Many of these organizations actively lobbied governments, influenced dietary guidelines, and even funded educational programs that subtly promoted synthetic foods as the only path forward. They weren't waiting for us to choose. They were designing a future where we had no other option. The climate crisis and food security were merely the convenient justifications for an unprecedented grab for power, a silent takeover of our plates, designed to eventually render traditional food systems obsolete. To this day, we may never know the full extent of the long-term consequences of this monumental shift. The lines between what is natural and what is engineered have blurred, perhaps irrevocably. We've entered an era where our sustenance is increasingly manufactured, not cultivated, and the implications ripple far beyond nutrition. What does it mean for our health, for our culture, for our autonomy, when the very food we rely on is produced in a bioreactor, often with patented ingredients, designed by algorithms, and distributed by a handful of powerful entities? Are we sacrificing centuries of evolved dietary wisdom for the sake of supposed efficiency and control? The question isn't whether synthetic foods will exist. They already do. The real question is how much control we, as individuals, still have over what we put into our bodies, and how much is being decided for us in boardrooms and labs, far from the fields and farms that once defined our relationship with food. Consider your next meal. How much of it is truly natural, and how much is a meticulously engineered illusion? The future of food, and perhaps of humanity, hinges on this uncomfortable truth. If you want more mysteries like this, the next video explores the hidden agendas behind the global water crisis and how it might be connected to this very story.